This is our last of our history series for this year. If we were relying on the vast numbers to show up here, we probably would not do them. But one of the advantages of having these is we've got, I got it as Easy Street Productions. Mr. Hegstead is back there and he records them. We have a problem, by the way, I got to talk to you later, but he records them, and so they're on the Sylvan website. It's sylvantwp.com, and you can find the old history that we did before COVID. And then we did, this will be our fourth one this year. So, glad to have you here. We're going to get started tonight. We're going to feature the resorts that are in our backyard. And we're going to start out with Kavanaugh's, and then we're going to go to Madden's, and then the last but not least, we're going to cover Mr. Cregan's domain. So I'll have a couple of announcements when we get done here, but we're going to do, after they're done, we're going to put them all at the table back there, and then if you've got any additional questions you want to ask them, go ahead. But for now, we're going to turn it over to Tom Cavanaugh, and he's going to tell us all about the history of Kavanaugh's Resort.
Well, hello everybody. Dave lied to me. He said there was going to be 300 people here. That's all right, though. I'm usually used to being up in front of the crowd cooking. Doing cooking classes, so this is something new for me. I'm Tom Cavanaugh from Kavanaugh's Sylvan Lake Resort, and I kind of joke that they threw me out here as cannon fodder, but really it's just because we're the youthful ones on the block, and we've only been there for 53 years in comparison to our two neighbors who've been there a lot longer. So actually, I'll give you a little back history before we start about people end up in the resort business for a lot of different reasons. In my case, I've spent 53 of my 56 years in it. And so I literally did grow up in the business, but I wasn't born into it. But I've been there my whole life. But my parents got into the resort business for other reasons, actually. They grew up over in the Carleton, Duluth area, actually graduated from Carleton High School, and were high school sweethearts and got married during World War II, and my dad was a naval aviator in World War II, and went into agriculture and farming, which he had done his whole life, and did that for quite a while until eventually going to work for a new company at that time, a cooperative, known as Midland, which became a pretty household name. And from that job, he actually ended up in another position with a company called Tyler. It was a brand new company over in Benson, Minnesota, and he became the national sales vice president for the company and traveled a great deal. So my mom had 6 boys at home and didn't like that. And my dad was getting a little concerned that we weren't working enough. Growing up on a farm like he did, he wanted to see that. So they decided they weren't going to go back into agriculture and started looking at resorts. My mom actually wanted to do a restaurant. She had always wanted to do that. And if any of you knew my mom, you knew that she was a wonderful self-taught chef. And so she wanted to do a restaurant. And we needed to do a resort because my dad wanted all of us to have to work. So in 1969, they found a small resort on Sylvan Lake called Brown's Forest. Cecil Brown was the owner. And Dutch, did you ever know Cecil? Dutch, did you ever know Cecil Brown? That owned the resort before us? Did you know Cecil?
Yeah.
Yes.
You got the refrigerator when they sold out.
Ah, there we go. All right. So we bought our resort, my parents did, from Cecil Brown. And we actually, to kind of show you that we didn't know anything about the resort business, they bought a resort at the end of the summer in 1969, not realizing that, gosh darn it, that's your whole season. So instead of worrying about it, it was a small resort, 9 cabins, a couple of motel rooms. and a restaurant that hadn't been used for a long time. It was a basement. It had a commercial kitchen, but the restaurant hadn't been open for about 4 seasons. So, and it kind of, so this is what the restaurant actually looked like when we moved there. It really was a basement. The thing over there, actually you would think that that's looking out over the lake. It's a picture. So they didn't have any windows. And so as I said, we bought it in 1969 in the fall, and the first thing my dad did was actually tear out that entire cement block wall and put windows in, because we were sitting right on Sylvan Lake, and it was a great view, and did that. The other thing we did was, to get up and operational, we decided to go into the winter business. We had some great neighbors, Dutch Cragen being one of them, Jim and Jack Madden, who became mentors, all 3 of them, to my dad. All thought he was crazy that he decided to go into the winter business. And the reason he did it was my dad came out of agriculture and cooperatives, and actually knew a lot of people who were doing this newfangled thing called snowmobiling. Farmers were the ones that had snowmobiles at that early stage, and he knew them all. So he literally got groups from Waseca and New Ulm and New Prague that he knew, and they would bring 40, 50 snowmobilers up. We had these 9 cabins and 2 motel rooms, none of which were winterized. And yet we were stuffing people into them in the winter. And it would be about 52, 53 degrees in the units. And we kept coal fires going underneath propane tanks to keep a little bit of fuel going. So it was an interesting first year. We called the restaurant the Matador Room. My mom was obsessed with the trips she had taken to Mexico. And so we had the Matador Room, and we had a big picture of a bullfighter in the restaurant. Thank God this only lasted 1 season. And then we found out that we could actually maybe just call the place Cabinets. So can't get it to move. So we actually did open up the summer of 1970, would have been our first real season. We did open the restaurant as well as our resort. Our first guests actually drove in off the road to the resort. And as I said, our neighbors were Cragans and Maddens. And my dad utilized their expertise quite a bit, because he didn't know anything about the resort business. So he actually talked with them a great deal. They became very good friends, and it was really quite important. Yeah. That was the one I tried. Oh, wait. Something. You could get. Okay. There we go. I just got to have it on there. All right. That's the first winter there. That's my dad bartending. Actually, I love this. I love the picture right here over to the side, because that was the interior of our cottages in that first year. Also, thankfully, that only lasted 1 year. We kind of tore into those and started to switch them around. And then I get in the picture right down there with the snowmobiles and the campfire on the lake, which was brilliant. And that's me standing there. So our early cottages, it was a pretty standard resort. It had been built actually in 1947. So it was not an old resort at that time. Most of the cabins were relatively new. The brown one up in the corner was actually the original home on the property, and then the one in the middle, the White House, became the previous owner's home, and of course had the restaurant underneath it. You can see the windows that my dad put in right away, which helped out a great deal. And then we kind of started some building projects as well. Actually, our very first building project was in the the spring, actually, of 1972. And we started something that we've been doing ever since. It's called rent share, where we actually had somebody from the outside buy and build a unit, 2 in this case, and they paid for it, and we managed and rented it. And that was something that we only did with those 2 units in our first 10 years, but then in 1980 we would do it with multiple units, and finally in 2005 we would take our entire property as a rent share property. So we had, I actually have 5 brothers. There's 6 boys in our family. God bless my mother. And 2 of our brothers were already they were off on their own. My brother Greg was in Vietnam. My brother Tim was in the Navy. And so it was the 4 of us, John, Dave, Mark, and I, that were at the property and lived at the property. All 4 of us would actually graduate from Pillager here. My brother John actually only went to school here for 6 months, but did graduate from Pillager and married a Pillager girl. So but I was the only one that actually went all through school here at Pillager. So we all kind of dug in. We started working at the business, and that would continue. There I am planting flowers up in that corner picture, and I think we still that first spring there. It's still called the Matador Room. You can see if you could just see in that corner picture the bullfighter. It's ridiculous. Honestly, even my mom would later say, "I don't know what I was thinking. It was awful. It was awful." So building, we did that all ourselves. I love this. Oh, missed it. So here in the early days of the restaurant, Brother Dave and my mom, and actually a Pillager girl there is waitressing, that's Cindy Veit. And our restaurant is what actually made us known early on. And that's what kind of became the thing for us. People knew us for the restaurant. The first season, it was not unusual for us to only have 4 or 5 people a night, and that just kept increasing, and we actually added on to our restaurant every year for the first 9 years we owned it, that we would expand it. And our business grew and grew. Once Scott Mudgett started working for us, it really took off. And how many people have worked at the 3 resorts that are in the room? That's not as many as I would have thought. Oh, it's cool though. So the restaurant kind of was what we were known for to begin with. But slowly over time, we tried to get the resort to catch up. Again, we did quite a few building projects, but really, in those first 10 years, all of our projects were expanding our restaurant operation, which was just seasonal. It was only open in the summer. And again, we were open through the winter season every year, and actually built a pretty good winter business, including, it was an American plant, so it included all the meals. And that became kind of a thing for us, and it actually helped us expand our summer business quite a lot because we got a lot of customers off of that. So it worked out well. And then in about 1980, we started to really add to the resort. We wanted the resort to catch up to some of the things we'd done. So in 1980, we actually did our first very big building project. Actually, technically, it was in the fall of '79, where we built 5 buildings, 10 units in all. They were duplexes that were all 3-bedroom units. It basically doubled the size of our resort, and it was our first big, huge rent share project. So we had investors that bought each one of those units, and we managed them. Then, quickly following that, in '82, we actually did up in the far corner, our views units, and then we would do in '84, our smaller Oaks units. It was those were 10 units, they're 5 buildings. We also added our first indoor pool that year, which was a big step for us. And of course, all the time we continued to do quite a bit of expansion to our restaurant as well. And the family grew, and our restaurant kind of stepped things up over time, and we started winning awards. That was kind of cool. Yeah, we actually, my parents had 16 grandkids. All of them worked in the business at some point. And technically all 6 of us worked, even though my 2 brothers were kind of already doing their own thing, they did come back and did a little moonlighting in the restaurant, whether it be bartending or just helping out around the resort. And like I said, all the grandkids have worked in the business, and currently we have the first of the great-grandkids that work, and actually that's Maddie, which is my brother John's granddaughter. For the first time, we actually hired somebody besides ourselves as a manager. So she's actually in management with our team, so that's kind of exciting. That's just because we're getting old and we hope to get out of it someday. Did I say that out loud? Obviously, the legacy was always built around my mom and dad, and they worked very, very hard in the business. And in 1993, my 3 brothers and I actually bought them out. Of course, all of us had been working in the business. My brother Dave and I have never left the business. We've been there throughout the entire time we've owned it. Mark and my brother John were gone for less than 4 years each. But since 1981, all of us have been in the business working full time. And we bought parents out in 93. And of course, mom and dad kind of stayed involved. They enjoyed doing that. And you'd still find dad down in the restaurant, certainly in the evenings. And my mom would make her treks to the kitchen quite a bit. So they stayed very involved. And of course, both passed away in the early 2000s. But really stayed involved with the operation up until their last couple years. So I love the middle watercolor. It's a picture a neighbor did from a photo, and we have it hanging in our office. And it's just kind of cool. My mom was making fruitcake, which my dad was one of 7 people in the world that liked fruitcake. So obviously today, we've changed a lot. We continue to, modernize our resort. There are none of the original cabins left from the resort. Our oldest unit is from 1972. It was our very first building project. And then currently, of course, in 2005 and 6 was our largest change because we took out our restaurant and left the restaurant business. And then we all celebrated. And we built more units in that spot, and became just a housekeeping resort. And we always tell people that restaurant business is hard, running a resort's pretty easy, so we prefer doing that. And we all my brothers and I work full-time in the business. My oldest brother, John, that's in the business, is 70, and I'm 56, so we all work full-time. 2 of our wives work pretty much full-time in the business, and then 2 of our wives are off campus in other jobs, but have all been involved. They all jump in there. And as I said, my brother John's granddaughter Maddie is now part of our management team. So slowly, we'll try to step people away by age. So John and Vicki will be the first that kind of step away a little bit more. Though they have no interest in being retired, so at least that's what they say. Currently, this middle one here, this is our very newest project that we're doing, which is our residences, which potential for 25 new homes, with 7 of them being built or built currently, that are actual not part of the rental program, but they are part of our management program. So it's kind of an exciting piece on the back property. Obviously we've modernized. We're still a year-round operation. We've expanded over the years. We started out with 800 feet of lake shore on Sylvan Lake. We have about 1,250 today. And we started out with about 17 acres, and we have about 24 acres today. So we have slowly added some around us over the course of time. We wish we could have added more, but, well, you know how that goes. So we weren't able to always do that. You know, it's a beautiful spot now. We have an indoor and outdoor pool, which, you know, is kind of neat for us. We have 2 beach areas on the resort. We can accommodate about 275 people in the summer when we're full, which makes us obviously the small guy among the triangle of resorts. But we're just kind of tucked back there, and that's okay. This next picture is kind of fun because I brought that old interior shot. Things have improved from some of those. We're a little bit nicer nowadays, which is good. And you know, for us as resorters here, I mean, we came in late. Obviously, Craigens and Maddens have been around. They're both, you know, pushing closer to the century mark, and we're only 53 years in, and we don't know how much longer we'll be. I guess the joke in the resort business is, you know, you retire in a wood box, but that might be. We'll see. But in our time as resorters, we've been very involved in the community. That's important to us, and it always has been. And that started with our parents. My dad was immediately involved in associations and chambers. And so for 47 years, one of us sat on the board of directors for the Minnesota Resort and Campground Association in Hospitality, Minnesota. And 3 of us, my brother John, my dad, and myself, were named Operators of the Year. We're the only resort in the state of Minnesota that has had 3 Operators of the Year out of that association. And we're in that Hall of Fame, which is a great, you know, wonderful thing for us to kind of show that, you know, we've been involved in that side of it, but also locally, especially the last 10 to 15 years, we've gotten much more involved here in the community, from being on the local chambers all the time. I serve on the board of directors for the Nisswa Chamber. My brother Dave has been the mayor of East Skull Lake for 18 years. My brother John was on the board of director, or the city council for I think about 23 years. And my brother Mark served on the school board here at Pillager for 10 years. So, you know, we've tried to do that. That's important to us, and our dad pretty much insisted upon it. So, and then the other important thing for us has been the employees over the years. Obviously, we're not a huge employer, never have been. When we had the restaurant, we were a little bit more so. We would have probably about 90 seasonal employees. But a couple of years ago, I did a speech here. I had to talk about some things here at Pillager, and I figured it out that we at that time had about 325 Pillager students who had worked for us over the years, which is pretty cool. And I will say that far more Pillager students have worked for us than Brainerd or anything else. I don't know if that's something that we tried to do. I guess it probably was, but but we did always try to do that. And again, like I say, we're not a huge employer, but you know, even today, we seasonally always have about 25 staff, obviously, because, you know, all of us work in the business. So that's been something that's been important to us. It's been a part of our growth. It's certainly been a part of our success. We know that, and we have enjoyed that part of it as well. And, you know, we've enjoyed becoming part of the resort community. And Ben and I were actually talking over here about how resorts have changed. And I said, I know at one time in the 70s, there were about 3,200 resorts in Minnesota, and there's only about 720 left. And so we're kind of a dying breed, and we certainly are even in this area. So to still be a part of that and to continue that legacy is important to us. So we've enjoyed it, and it's you know, something that I don't think we're going away, at least not for the time being. I mean, I might go away for a couple of weeks, but not full time. So, all right. you need to plug it.
Yep.
Let me
Yeah.
introduce him, you plug that in, Ben.
Okay.
All right, this one over here. Ben Thuringer is third generation of the Madden's operation?
Screws it up.
No, he's the one that his mother appointed to be the presenter tonight. So I want you to welcome Ben, and as Tom said, we'll have time for questions after you get done. So are you set? Are you ready?
I'm ready.
All right,
Here it comes.
you're it.
Let's see if I
I
can.
don't see anything.
Oh, look at that. Now I'm going to try and blow this up so people can see. Show. Present. Look at that. You need a job. Looking for a job? All right. Thank you very much, everybody. My name is Ben Thuringer. I am the COO at Madden's Resort. Just right down the road, get to be neighbors with these fine gentlemen. We've been at it for a little bit over 90 years here. And on Gull Lake, of course, right down the road. There we go. So really how Madden's came about was in the 1920s, 1930s, a lot of things going on. My grandfather and his brother were living in Stillwater, and their father had a grocery store there. But they had an uncle, Uncle Tom, that was up working in this area, and he had a bar that was just right on 77. And the Madden brothers, they were 18, 19 years old, or at least Jim was at that time. I never did know Jack. Jack passed away in 78. Same year I was born, Jim passed away in 2001. So Jim became a very good friend, and my grandfather, was really close with him. But at that stage of the game, Tom was running a bar called the Bloody Bucket. Sounds like a great place. But he said, you guys really need to get up here. This area is about to expand. And he introduced these guys to, you want to go a little closer? Thank you. Usually I talk too loud. They introduced these guys to Chester Stark and also Arthur Roberts as well. In those days, Arthur Roberts was, I would say he would be like a Hilton. He had over 20 hotels throughout the United States, and the Madden and Golf Club, which was right in the background, was one of his. It had been built basically between the years of 1913 and kind of wrapped up in that 1925 area along with the Pine Beach East Golf Course. So you can see our rate sheet right there from, it's just about as low as Dutch's rates when he tries to compete with us. We have $5 to $6 per day if you wanted a toilet. And $10 to $12 a day for a double. It was those times. In 1932, Jack and his Uncle Tom, they leased the Pine Beach East Golf Course, and 2 years later purchased it with no money down. Now, a little factoid about that, their lease on the golf course was $150 for the summer, and they couldn't make it. Arthur Roberts and Chester Stark really were, they're never mentioned, but this area wouldn't, it probably wouldn't be what it is without them, and Dutch would probably comment on that as well. In 1934, Madden Inn was open, and it consisted of a lunch spot and caddy shack, but no guest rooms. 1937, Jim Madden takes over as his Uncle Tom's interest in the property. That's when Jim came in to the business and joined up with his brother Jack. In 1941, 24 cabins are added to Mission Point. Mission Point is a pretty cool area. I actually rebranded it back to Mission Point. It was the Madden Lodge for a lot of years, but we made some changes. It would have been in 2016. And the reason being is originally it was Mission Point Resort, And even before that, it was actually an Indian missionary area, and there was just a ton of conflict going on that side of the lake. Chief Holnaday played a part in that. You can read up a lot on in many different Gull Lake history books about what Mission Point played for the major Indian battles in this area, including Birch Island, which is Birch Island not because of birch trees, but there was a birch canoe factory out on the island. A little history for you. 1946 to 1949, Madden comes to life with guest rooms, a coffee shop, and the prime rib room. In 1955 to 1956, the Voyager, which was kind of a little boutique resort that's on Wilson Bay, we still have the Voyager area. That area is built. That was one spot. The original Voyager resort was destroyed by the storm in 2015. It was leveled in 2015. In 1956, a new attraction, Lumbertown USA, is dedicated. That was Lumbertown USA was Jack's deal. Jack was huge into history, and over years he had assembled a collection of buildings and all sorts of different items to form Lumbertown, and that was a big attraction for a lot of years. And I should say that prior to this, Jim had been gone for a number of years. He was based in Honolulu during World War II, and now we're to this juncture where he's back again, of course. In 1956, Jack and Jim were entrepreneurial businessmen. They really loved the art of a deal. They liked operating as well, but they were entrepreneurial, always working, always going. Jim was one of the first ones to build lodging in Vail, Colorado, if you can believe it, with a guy by the name of Dr. Doug Johnson, who lived on the peninsula. And to this day, we have assets in Vail. And boy, did they ever have vision. So the point with that is they brought in John Arnold. John had worked as a front desk worker in the early 50s, and then he was with North Central Airlines as the first ever food and beverage director for an airline. John came back and joined as a co-owner and operator. And that allowed Jim and Jack to really start to expand. A lot of land acquisitions happening at that point. Madden's is 1,100 developed acres, and we still have a lot of areas that we just won't touch because we really feel that our area is changing and we want undeveloped land. We still have 280 acres in Wilson Bay that is over a mile of shoreline, and it's beautiful over there. I was just there the other day, walking around, and it's just really neat to see the way the property is. In 1962, the Social 9 Par 3 course opens up. It's still there. It's a really fun course. In 1964, a fire mysteriously destroys this building, which is right here in 1964, burned down on July 4th. My mother tells me my grandfather hated that building. I have no clue what happened to it, but I guess some oily rags burned it down. And there it is right next to it. And then he was really able to dive into his vision with what is now the Madden Inn and Golf Club, which is our main central area. In 1969, Madden's purchased the Rutgers Pine Beach Lodge, now known as our Wilson Bay area. You want to talk about some folks that have really deep history in our area. I have the utmost respect for Jack and the Rucker family. They are special individuals, and they were a little bit of everywhere for a long time, and they still are. So we purchased that area, and that area was another one. It was all of our westerly shoreline that was destroyed in 2015. So this building is pictured, of course. It looks somewhat the same, but very, very different. It no longer has lodging in it, and we use it as a banquet meeting facility. 1974 to 75, Jim was a huge tennis player, loved tennis. Tennis courts were constructed, and they're now part of our tennis and croquet club that was built in 1991. In 1985 to 86, they had the vision for corporate business. Corporate business is probably, it used to be more, but now it's probably about 60% of our business is corporate. In our town hall building, it's still a very, 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 very important to us, as well as our pavilion structure for servicing our corporate clients. 1989, Brian Thuringer becomes a partner. He had been there since the late 70s, and throughout the 70s, the Madden brothers had a hotel that was in Little Falls called the Pine Edge Inn. And both he and my mother went to college. All of us went to college in Colorado at various locations. They had moved back, and they were living at the Pine Edge Inn and running that for my grandfather because they needed jobs. They were there until the late 70s, and then in 80, my father worked at the resort in 89, became a partner. And in 1997, he had the chance to fulfill one of his big marks for every generation needs to leave a mark. And he left a really big one with the Classic. That had been his vision for that area. He and Scott Hoffman had been walking that property forever, and they decided, hey, let's take a swing at opening a golf course. And in 1990, it didn't actually open in 97. The course died the first winter. It opened in 98. So that was a little disheartening for them after their first year of growing, the grass died. But hey, in 1998, they opened their doors, and the Classic became a top 100, which was really, they did not expect that at all. They just wanted a great golf experience, and that's still what we focus on, is a great golf experience. In 1998, they built a 26-plex unit and a 14-plex unit that we refer to as our golf villas. I don't believe she put a picture of those. No, but she did put a picture of, there is the old Voyager right there. That is it in 2015 when we were about to take it down. 2001, Brian and Deb Thuringer assumed ownership after Jim Madden passed away. I was living in Vermont, I remember it well, in 2001 when my grandfather passed away. He had a very long struggle with a bad staph infection in his hip. I think he struggled with that for close to 11 years. In 05 to 06, we opened up our first spa. That was an up-and-coming item. And we opened up our Madden Brothers Market as well. 2015, we talked about this a little bit. A severe storm damages and shuts down 30% of the resort mid-season. Blessings in disguise. We did lose 30% of our resort, but it turns out resorters are a little bit resilient. And we shut the resort down completely for 2 weeks, and then we reopened what we could. That was everything except for the westerly face. And then that next spring, we were able to reopen everything, and that included 90 new units between units and cabins, and then the new Wilson Bay Lodge as well. 2016, my dad, after the storm, he said, I've had it, I'm retiring. No, actually 65 is when the partners retired. That just, with next generations coming in, between my sister and I, there's 5 grandkids, who knows if any of them. Yeah, they're too smart to enter into this business. But in 2016, my sister and I bought out my dad's shares, and my mother still dabbles in the business. She comes in and does some interior decorating and things of the sort. She's on the left. I'm the bald guy in the right there. You can see me, and then that's Abby, my sister, and my father, Brian. Let's see, in 2016, we we remodeled what was Jim's former home. I lived there for a little while, then moved off property, and we remodeled that, and we turned it into guest lodging. And in 2020, I am an outdoors person. I absolutely love the outdoors, and we hit, as resorters, we're always having to do things that are dysfunctional, and we have to make them work. And one of those things that we were doing was an awful lot of outdoor dining events. I don't like food and beverage, and if we're going to do it, I want to do it efficiently. So at Madden's, if you've ever been to Madden's recently, you can see the big pavilion building that's positioned next to, right next to our recreation center. And that allows us to do outdoor functions really, really well. And we opened that in 2019, which 2019, 2020, part of 21, having the ability to do outdoor functions well was key. So a little bit about myself. I worked at the resort in the summer times throughout grade school, throughout high school. I went to Regis University in Denver. I was a ski bum. And I'd come home and work a little bit in the summer. Otherwise, I was living in Colorado. Went out to Vermont for 8 months, decided Vermont was not for me, moved to Minnesota, and I went to work for a guy by the name of Bill Morrissey, who was operating at that time the St. Paul Hotel in Morrissey Hospitalities. And I got to go through some great things. Bill was nice enough to take me under his wing at the St. Paul Hotel. And while I was there, we expanded out into doing all the catering for the Excel Center and just really fun times. And he showed me another side of hospitality that I enjoyed. I didn't, at that stage of the game, I was working on my pilot's license, and I was thinking about going to, we've always been aviators at the resort. And I was thinking about going to Alaska or Canada and flying for a living. Then I realized that those people generally don't have long lives. And, the family also gave me a call and said, hey, you've been gone 8 years. You should maybe think, are you going to do this? Because if you are, maybe think about coming back. None of us are actually encouraged to stay in the business. We're discouraged. It's a hard business to be in. Between, Tom shot out one stat, I'll shoot out another. Between here and Cross Lake, there used to be 171 resorts. Baker's dozen now. It's really tough, and so I operate the resort. I also fight very hard on the federal and state level for good. I haven't had any success. Minnesota's a really tough spot to run a resort. Colorado's even easier. But we try and make progress all of the time. So there's a little bit about Madden's and a little about the family, and thanks for listening.
I'll give you a mic, and you can sit if you wish. All right, I have to introduce somebody that probably needs no introduction, Mr. Dutch Cregan, owner of Cregan's Resort. And he's going to tell us all about that and several other things. Now, Dutch, as I told you before, when I get up and start moving towards you, that means your time is up. And you should wrap things up. All right?
I think my time is already good enough.
Good luck with it. I should also tell you that his sidekick is more than a sidekick here. He's the general manager, right?
Yes.
Of Madden's, that's Madden's over there, isn't it? Of Cregan's properties. So he's got a big job, including keeping an eye on Dutch. So with that, Dutch, it's all yours.
Okay, well, it's only appropriate that I would follow Madden's because that's why Craigens are there. My dad and Jack Madden went to the University of Minnesota together, and they both worked in the Minnesota Daily advertising office selling ads. That's where they got acquainted. And how many of you know about Minnesota 13? Raise your hands. Oh my gosh. Well, Minnesota 13 was derived around the small towns of St. Cloud. Am I clear to everybody? Yeah. Okay. And this is a large Polish German settlement where everybody made their own booze. And Minnesota 13 was famous for having gone through the still twice. It's a pure, wonderful stuff. And people from Minnesota got to know the St. Cloud area, Holdings Forest, Avon, that area, for Minnesota 13. And they started coming up for the weekends to these little towns. And pretty soon, Minnesota 13 became available in Fort Ripley, Little Falls, and Pine Beach, and a little bit northern. But this was all during Prohibition. And during Prohibition, the Maddens were involved in tourism to a degree, but Uncle Tom, I guess that's my dad and mother. Anyway, Uncle Tom had the slot machine franchise from St. Cloud up through International Falls. And Jack Madden, being an alert young man, worked for Uncle Tom to set the slot machines up during the summer vacation. Up to 90% for the house. Come on, breathe deeply. 90% for the house. Okay? And that worked perfectly for Uncle Tom, that he got in on the Minnesota 13 stuff until Prohibition ended. In 1932, Uncle Tom, as you remember some of the background, Uncle Tom sold the golf course to Jack Madden. And Jack took over the golf course, and by that time he had moved back to Brainerd, and my dad got the job in Laverne, Minnesota, and it closed down a newspaper, so he came back to Brainerd, to Minneapolis, and bought a very small little printing shop where he printed some of these things that you were seeing back there. Paul Bunyan was hardly known, and so my dad and Jack Madden organized in Brainerd the first Paul Bunyan event, 1936. And in that time, they were able to organize a little parade. They got some bands from St. Cloud and actually Crosby and something from Staples. They had a little parade right through the middle of Brainerd. And they had a few log rolling contests and so on. But Brainerd caught on to this. So for 1937's parade, you could buy Paul Bunyan jams, Paul Bunyan jellies, Paul Bunyan statue that's about so high. And it was really, my dad and Jack had a hamburger stand together in the old city jail. And so anyway, this is some of the printing goods that was coming out of Queen Press, which my dad owned, this little printing shop. We couldn't show all the things because there was really barnyard humor. So Jack had this golf course, my dad had the printing shop, and they decided, okay, they do the Paul Bunyan thing. And in the Paul Bunyan deal, one of the little boys who became a sculptor actually, made a contract with Brainerd to have Paul Bunyan and Babe for the next parade. Well, it took over 2 summers to do this, and it finally came up on the railroad to Brainerd just before war was declared, okay? And so it also gave time for the Chamber of Commerce manager, where is he? I don't blame him, but the guy who's in charge in 1939 ran off with all the money from the Paul Bunyan parades and escaped from Brainerd has never been found. So Paul and Babe came up on the train, and the war had just broken out, and Jack Madden decided he needed money badly. So he became a real estate agent and sold my dad this property. Now, you couldn't imagine what it was like then, but it was right next to the golf course, and there's a steep bank down to a swamp. In 1940, swamps were to fill in. Yeah. And so at the bottom of the hill, and by the way into Craigens was a dirt road right there. And John Riedel had started a little flying school and wanted to have an airport there, but nobody flew in. So anyway, that was our sign. And that was the airport, and here's the first cabin built in 1941. Well, that was the year that we had a huge snowstorm. My grandpa was stuck in this cabin for the Armistice Day blizzard. Some of you younger folks might remember that. Do you? So anyway, he stuffed newspapers in the wall, closed the windows off with plastic, and survived that blizzard. That was the only first building put up. Now, the amazing thing is, he survived. Everything else was cut. And so that was our first main lodge, which was built by the Collins family, the Van Sickles, the Rarens. Those are familiar names, some of you folks here. Every family had one cabin to build. And some of the families couldn't read too well. They all got plans. But the lodge up there at the top was built, and then there was a cave-in, and so they went down the second floor, and then that yellow type of building was where we lived. And go back one if you can. There. That's a cave-in, our basement. And so that became a recreation room. Okay, now the next one was the clubhouse. Now, the Maddens were scrupulously adventurous in making things work. And so as you saw back there from explanation, there was no business in 1940. Zero. The war broke out. And so everybody who was able-bodied ran off to be drafted or enlisted. But the Maddens still had this golf course. And so Jack, being the land agent, was showing off the golf course to my father to please buy it so we could build up some cabins and have a little business on the golf course. All right. So there was cabin 1, 2, 3 in the lodge. And here's my little sister playing croquet and shuffleboard and so on. But really nothing happened. I mean, there wasn't much business. 1940, who knew whether the resorts would continue? So my dad, who had been selling Paul Bunyan booklets through northern Minnesota, decided that they needed to have a resort association. So the first members were the Rutger family, the Maddens, and the Cragans, we had about 35 resorts that were part of the first Minnesota Resort Association. The purpose was to run a 1-inch ad in the Star Journal Tribune that Minnesota resorts were still in business during the war. Now here's a collection of the resorts that were around the Cragans development. Now remember, we were the only ones that had a dirt road entrance. Madden had a blacktop, Island View had a blacktop, the golf course. So these are the folks that around the red circle is Ben Curry, who owned Island View Lodge. Mr. Curry had a father who bought a sandpaper company, and it became Minnesota Mining. So Ben had a boat that he would often go up the shore a ways to pick up Jim Madden, and then they'd terrorize the rest of Gull Lake. Before we do this Army stuff, I want to tell you how it really became an amazing thing that Gull Lake was the center of activity. And so when the war broke out and there was nobody coming up to play golf, they tried to promote Paul Bunyan again. And that's when the Chamber of Commerce lost all their money, and the Paul Bunyan statue was in the corner of 210 and 371. And how many of you brought children in there? Anybody? Oh, way in the back. And you tell Paul what the boy's name was. Oh, Billy, how are you? And Billy, oh my God, Paul Bunyan knows me. Remember that? Okay. So anyway, this is the southern development of northern Nisswa and so on. There's Buzz and his wife, and during the war, Buzz taught pilot training. There's my dad and mother. There's Jack and Peg Madden. Jim joined the service so that he could be manager of the Honolulu Men's Club in Honolulu. He was a war hero. And this is John Arnold, we think. And there's Ben.
But Irma didn't, did you notice that?
What's that?
The note says Irma didn't think it was him.
No, that was my mother and dad up there. Oh, so listen, I have got to sit down for a minute here. So anyway, Mr. Curry, who's circled in red up there, his father bought all the stock when there was a sandpaper company. It turned out to be 3M. And so he married his secretary. And on the wedding day, he had a special bridal present for her. It was the keys to Island View Lodge. He said, would you marry me and run Island View? And she said, well, I suppose so. So Island View was run by Ben Curry. And anyway, quite a character. And toward the end of his life, he was wheelchair bound, so we had purchased Island View on Irma and I. So we put a ramp in for Ben to make it into his favorite dining room at Craig's. Okay, well, so I was at the University of Minnesota during the Korean War, and then as soon as I graduated, I joined, and I was in the Army at Gumshoe, and I had spent 2 years in the Army Reserve, and so they made me a corporal. And nobody was worse than Corporal Cregan to drill troops. And there I am in the front there, and there I am worn out. Anyway, I finished 2 years, and I came back and I asked my dad, what are you gonna do? And he called me when I was going to the University of Berlin after the war. And he said, the university is starting to air condition their classrooms for summer adult education. And I have to sell the resort. You or somebody else? Hello? I said, Dad, I'm thinking. Is there any way that anybody can make a living from a resort? He said, hell no. Why do you think I work all winter? What do you think the Maddens are doing all winter? What about the Kavanaughs? There's no way to make a success out of a resort and to serve on that as this your single occupation. But you'll get to travel a lot in the winter. So I came back, found this lovely lady in San Francisco, Irma, and talked her into coming to Minnesota. She's from British Columbia. Could you imagine that? So beautiful. And this is what we started to build here. I don't know, this is down 1959 or something. Yeah, we put a swimming pool in, outside, heated. And that was quite unusual. In fact, the Maddens were not too happy about it, because they didn't have one yet. So that's our rate schedule. You can, for the day, I got all involved in politics. I ran for the state legislature, and I got beat. And we had this swimming pool outside, and decided that we would have an outdoor art show. And so we did it right there, and I was really naive to this, didn't realize what a bunch of watercolors, if put in the grass, what they would do to watercolors. It made them all run. So the first show was Bill Grange over there, and I can't remember who else. But anyway, it got bigger and bigger until finally, on the 4th of July, we couldn't park everybody. So Irma and I talked to at that time it was the Ladies Auxiliary something or other. We talked them into having art in the park on the 4th of July. And it has grown since that time to be a sensational 4th of July event. But in that first one, we didn't know if we could get anybody to come and look at the paintings. So we approached Bill Matthews, who had skin diving outfit, and he was demonstrating this new thing called skin diving or snorkeling or being underwater and breathing. And so we had Bill Matthews at that first event, and this is alongside of our little pool area. Well, then we started adding a couple more sides to the thing, and did a lakeshore dining room construction right in the middle of the fall and early winter. It always rained when we don't do something in the winter. Always rained. Can you imagine that? The only way you get it cleaned off is with a squeegee. And so anyway, there's a large edition, pictures of that. And finally, Chronicles yielded to us and sold. They were next door, and some of their rooms. And then we started building along the slope where Carnival Resort was. And was that the one, the photograph back there? Was that when? Yeah, I think, no, is that? Well, anyway, we were constructing a basement, and I always went to the cheapest contractor. And the guy turns out to not have any brakes in his cement machine. And it went into the basement. And so I'm down celebrating in Minneapolis with my father on his birthday. And they had the Hawaiian band in the Nicollet Hotel. And it was happy birthday to you, happy birthday to you, happy birthday to Dutch's father, happy birthday to you. And then the note comes in for a happy birthday present. The cement machine has gone into the basement full of cement, and we got to get it out of there before the cement hardens up. That might be the picture. And then we started building more stuff and have our tennis center. And then we finally got a hold of Ben Curry and his followers, many of whom are still around here. Trevor Yoho was one of the last owners, and his wife Marla is the secretary for Fairview Township that's trying to arrange a bike trail around the west side of Gull Lake. Well, that's enough about Craig. Whoop. Okay. So anyway, that's Island View Lodge. There's an outside deck. And that's where we are now. And my wife is missing, passed away just a half year ago. And we got in the golf business. And there's Robert Trent Jones Jr. And we started building the clubhouse, but the lady at the East Gull Lake had a notion that we had to be 25 feet from the eave to the ground. Well, the charter was for homes on the lake. The reason they did that, they didn't want to wreck anybody else's view of the lake. So for the whole summer, it went from the planning to the zoning to the city council and back and forth. And finally, I asked the Maddens, Jim, I think, how did you put this tower up? And he said, listen, dummy. We were good friends. So he said, listen, dummy, just call up Raritan's and have them bring over about 3 truckloads of dirt. And then you put it on either side of your main entrance so it'll build up the height between the earth and the rafters, and the 25 feet was permitted. And Irma and I got excited about promoting Paul Bunyan, and there he is over at the Chamber of Commerce, which any of you folks know Lisa Paxton. Lisa was an amazing woman, Chamber of Commerce president, turned the attitudes of people around from the Brainerd Chamber and the Nisswa Chamber and the Pequot Lakes Chamber to the Lakes, L-A-K-E-S, Chamber. And she got the Minnesota Highway Department to provide property so that south of Brainerd, we have the Brainerd Chamber of Commerce. What's that? What was the last one right there? Well, that's the latest success story we have. Is that sitting at a table for dinner in the clubhouse was Tom Lehman. And he pointed out, I didn't know who the hell he was. So Mr. Lehman, what are you doing here? Oh, he said, I'm watching my son qualify for the junior chamber, no, the junior PETA. Well, I said, you know, we want to enlarge, but I've had 2 other architects and I don't really like what they've done. Would you be interested? Well, I don't know, maybe. Don't go. Stay here at this table. I'm going to run home, get the plans, and give them to you. Put them under your pillow. Let me know tomorrow at noon if you'd like to work on it. And he's, okay. Well, it turns out that 4 o'clock in the morning, he does yoga. So he did yoga for an hour. Then he walked the whole course. And at noon, he said, yeah, I'm in. So Tom Lehman had been redeveloping and redesigning every one of our holes, plus doing his own 18-hole course. And he'll be back next spring with more surprises. So, that's some of the renovations. They don't care about those. Run through that. So anyway, Craigan's is still hanging in there. I'm 90 and a half now. And if it weren't for the Maddens, Craigan's wouldn't be here. And if it weren't for both of us, I don't think your dad would have bought Browns for Rest, Mr. Kavanaugh. And he had a great relationship with Jack Madden, who helped him out through thick and thin. So, that's the story of Minnesota resorts in our little area of Gull Lake, which we think is probably the best little area in the whole state. So thank you for coming. Boring as we can. Oh, okay.
You know, that might have been a missed opportunity right there. If you handed me the mic, I probably should have taken it. You know, they ask about, I think it was Tom asked about the employment from these resorts or from their resort. And when I first got here at Pillager, there were hundreds of people that had worked at one of those resorts at one time or another. I mean, generations of them. Scott, you know, so many that worked there. Scott even worked at all of them, hasn't he? He's been there. I remember a few of those projects myself. But not only do we owe him a thanks for being here tonight to give us some idea of the beginnings of these great resorts, but I say this kind of because I think it's kind of funny. Dutch does not. But they're also great contributors to this particular facility because they're great taxpayers as well. So we do appreciate the fact that they're good community people, but they're a big part of this as well.
I think I told you, Dave, that the line was gerrymandered in 1932 when there was nothing happening. So Madden and Craigan's were included in District 161 here for Pillager because it was so quiet, nothing was happening. And they saved a lot of money in taxes. So that our 2 properties are in one half and Brainerd is 181 across the lake from us.
And we like it that way.
Yeah.
So let's get to the questions. I will repeat the questions. If you want to ask questions, I'm going to repeat them just because some of the people in the audience aren't going to hear you. Peter.
How much have VRBOs and short-term rentals affected?
Good question. The question is, how much has VRBOs and have affected the resort business? So you might have to turn your mic on there too, Tom.
Yeah, mine's on.
Okay, all right. Who wants to answer that one?
I'll grab it. I don't think any at all. But one thing that we hear all the time, and these are just personal opinions, is, man, alive, aren't you so glad how our area is expanding? And my answer is no, I'm not. You know, like I said earlier, big outdoors person. I love the outdoors. And I love seeing green space, especially in our area, East Skull Lake. The cabin life really doesn't do anything for the resorts. You look at Lake Minnetonka and you say, do you want to be the next Lake Minnetonka? Heck no. You don't. Resorts are public access to our outdoors, which is a wonderful thing. VRBOs, I don't think impact us at all. It is a different guest experience than what any of us provide. It's, I've got to be honest, when I go to some areas of the world, Caribbean, I go VRBO, because it's more of a private experience. But if you're looking for a full service experience, you go VRBO. We do see VRBOs thinking that at times that the resorts are their own personal playgrounds, which they're not. You don't get access to what the resorts provide through a VRBO.
Sure. Next question. Anyone else?
Let me add a little bit to that.
Yeah.
The Thurgers have gone into flying, and one of the major additions to Pine Beach area is the airport, the Pine Beach Airport, which they maintain, mow it and put up these standards and so on. Plus, quite a bit of activity comes through the Brainerd Airport to our resorts. And I don't believe they would have put the gantry and developed all that unless there had been so much aviation fuel and so on built and sold in this area. Fair enough?
Fair enough. Another question. Another question out there. I think I might have a couple. You guys should think about it a little hard. Hey, Tom, question for you. My son played basketball here. Did you have all the basketball players working in your kitchen?
We have a lot of them. No doubt about it. That particular in Reed's year, that whole group pretty much worked for me in the kitchen. That was a kitchen
Did you have to
staff.
buy new dishes when they got done?
Well, there were some that were clumsier than others. I don't know how they played basketball.
They were
a good group. I should have put that picture on our deal. We had one of our Valley Fair experiences where we were all dressed up as cowboys and cowgirls, even the guys. And still one of my favorite pictures of the staff.
And I appreciate what you were doing there, because for him and for all those students, it was a great work experience. You guys gave us some opportunities that, expanded, gave them a little money, expanded their work experience, and most of them turned out to be pretty good workers along the line.
Yeah, it's interesting because one of the other great area resorts, not in the Pillager District, was Grandview. And Mark Ronai was a long-time general manager, just retired this past year from there. But I was like Mark always said about working at resorts is that we taught kids how to work. And I think that's very true. And sometimes the hospitality business gets a bad rap that, they're underpaid, they don't make a lot of money, blah, blah, blah. And if you look at it right, what the experience is, I think is what we bring, and we teach kids how to work.
Sure, I agree, 100%. It's good work experience. Ben, question for you. You said you had 1,100 acres? Did I hear that right? So do you have quite a bit of acreage out to the west? Is that all? If we drove by the entrance to Pine Beach, is that a lot of that your area then too?
So that would include the Classic, and then as you move over, and then as you go down 77 towards Madden's, we have some undeveloped properties through that area. The resort itself, the Pine Beach West, our driving range, and then some land to the west of the Pine Beach West course, and then a really large chunk of property that I hold very dear to my heart, and that's 280 acres over in the on the west side of Wilson Bay
Okay.
that the Madden brothers had purchased from the railroad at one point.
Sure. And as far as the golf courses go, the original golf course that you both commented on, both you and Dutch commented on, that's the one that sits between your two properties, is that correct?
The
right
Pine
right
Beach
at the
East.
Roger, the Pine
The
Beach.
Pine Beach East and the Social 9 course.
And then Pine Beach West came, what time?
Dutch, correct me if I'm wrong, 1964?
Okay.
Yeah, the first night was
Yeah, first night.
64, and the second night I think came on at about 75.
Which ironically is right in your backyard.
Which, yeah, it
Yeah.
borders our property, that's why.
Sure.
That-
Yeah. I think it's a great privilege for us to have 3 resorts so tightly put together, and over the years, my understanding was they didn't get along every day, but they got along most days, and it's pretty unusual, I think, to have businesses grow, and all of them growing immensely. Dutch, your newest renovation of the golf course, with that, how many holes of golf do you have now? Or should I ask Eric?
55 and a half.
I don't even want to ask where a half comes from.
They're only half done, some of them.
Eric, is that close? All right, Eric said that's right.
Eric, how many do we have?
54.
54?
Well, in the reversibles, maybe 63. You play 2 different ways.
Oh, we're not counting it that way.
No.
That's double enough. We're not doing that. We have a question over here.
How many people are employed at those facilities, and what percentage would be local residents versus those that come in for the season of work?
How many people are employed at each of your facilities? How many are full-time and how many are seasonal? Is that the question? Let's start with you, Tom.
So we employ in the middle of summer, we employ about 32 people, 100% from the area. And of those, let's see, if we're counting us, we have 6, 7, 8 year-round employees, including us. There's 8 of us, and then the rest are seasonal.
By the way, I underestimated, I was just guessing, and you said you had 206, capacity of about 270 guests?
Yeah,
That's amazing.
yeah,
That's
yeah,
amazing.
that's if we're full. Let's go, Ben, go.
Ben, what's your employment picture look like?
Yeah, so our ideal staffing number is 550 during our peak time period. This year was much better. We got ourselves up to 500. And to go to the question, 110 of those workers are international that come to us. 78 of those would be H-2B professional workers. I probably wind up in DC about 6-7 times a winter, advocating to get those employees here, to get more H-2Bs in. Our facts really work out on the match up with natural items, and that is with H-2B workers, 5 American jobs for every 1 H-2B is what we bring in. So those H-2Bs are absolutely huge to us. The rest are J-1s, which are college kids and come and work for the summer. So in total, 110 internationals. But I will say we don't see a lot of people working between the ages of, call it 20 and 25, 26. But thank goodness we're starting to see a lot of kids that are coming in and working before we wouldn't employ under 18. We had to start going lower than that just to staff the resort. So we're seeing some great kids that are coming in, a lot of Pillager kids, a lot of Brainerd kids that are 15, 16, 17 years old.
And Dutch, what does your employment
I'm going to
picture
have
look
to
like?
make a wild guess, but first of all, I want to ask Tom, how many high school students are you encouraging to go into the resort business?
Well, I like to think quite a few. But
Well, I think-
I don't know if they will, but
At one time, you know, we felt high school kids were too young. But now, we're grateful to have some come over from Villager to come to work. So I'm going to ask Eric to give me a closer count.
500? And most of that is seasonal, but some, 160 to 180 year round, and peak out 500. Yeah, okay.
And when it got to be kind of critical for finding staff, we really worked hard to get foreign students to come over in the summer, especially. And that worked just fine when we copied what Grandview was doing. We got 40 or 50 Chinese students, and we found out that when they got home, they were all interrogated for spies about what doing in the U.S. Really? No kidding. And then we had about 30 or 40 Polish students set for the COVID times, and that got cut off. We have about 10 or 15 Mexican students on and off, but it's really tough to get students from a foreign country now, where that was kind of the central core.
Did you ever hire any from the leader area?
From where?
Leader area.
Just hired one.
We were looking at some companies or some countries which like pork. And so you all know about the international leader.
Well, Dave, though, should say, you know, and both these guys use internationals. Obviously, we never have had to, but still, that's the thing that's hurting us the most right now in our industry is staffing. And obviously, there's a lot of industries that are facing that, but you know, we're not seeing the influx, especially of some of the youth, though we are having a pretty good luck, and we always have with 15, 16, 17-year-olds, but still, it's the last 2 years have been tough on staffing.
How many guests do each of these resorts accommodate?
Okay, how many guests do you accommodate?
275 for us, and we're at full capacity.
Full capacity, like July 4th, it's north of 900, but I really like that's not an ideal number. I like our sweet spot to be anywhere between 600 to 700 people.
Eric? Say again? 1,100.
Yeah, don't let anybody be fooled by that number though, Eric. That was 500 when you sold out basements and my old house. And I think we had about 50 staying over in Madden's too, didn't we?
And they didn't even know about it, that's the whole
It was in the winter.
That could go both ways, Dutch. Dan, question?
Ben, you mentioned you weren't too happy about Minnesota's regulations and business climate. You like Colorado. What could Minnesota do to make it better?
You know, so we deal with hospitality in Colorado and in the Vail area in particular. And in Vail, it's quite interesting. You cannot build a private residence in the town of Vail. They will not approve it. It has to be up for hotel or commercial use. Their permitting is very conducive to what is realistic. Minnesota permitting is really, really difficult to get around, and our agency fees are absolutely nuts. State inspectors make up their own rules in our state. I don't find that in other areas, but we find that here in Minnesota.
Pete, you had a question.
Yeah, regarding employment, are there 2-year or 4-year programs that encourage hospitality industry?
Yeah, the question is, are there 2 or 4 year programs in higher education, I assume community colleges and colleges for training of hospitality.
Well, let's start actually at the high school level.
Sure.
And this happens right here at Pillager. About 15 years ago, the National Restaurant Association started a program called ProStart. And ProStart is a culinary training program in restaurant management. And then piggybacking onto that is actually one that is for hotel management as well. And started putting it in schools throughout the country. Minnesota has about 120 schools now that have ProStart culinary. Pillager has an exceptional ProStart program. And in our last building project, we actually had a complete redo of what was a FACS type room, family and consumer science, which really didn't exist anymore because those programs went away, and turned it into a commercial kitchen type environment with 3 stations. And so we have about 60 students that take ProStart here at Pillager. I know this because I'm very involved with it. I actually am the chef mentor for Pillager and also the coach for our culinary team. And so we have a culinary team that competes at the state and national level and has done very well, actually has done better than any school north of St. Cloud. We have more places at the state level than anybody north of St. Cloud. So that's one way, and by doing that, we were also able to get a CLC at Central Lakes College culinary program going here over the last year that is in place. And the hope has always been that if we can get ProStart, which does exist in 8 area schools, Pillager definitely being the most involved in it, that you get a student base that can go on to the CLC program, which is an affordable culinary program. So many culinary programs are very expensive, and they put young culinarians into a great deal of debt. Immediately think of like the Culinary Institute of America, which is very expensive. So this is a development that we've started to work on that tries to get training and some of the necessities that these students need to enter the kitchen workforce. And then, like I said, the hotel program also is starting to take off and just gives that next level of hotel management or resort management. So it's exciting stuff, and it's come a long way. I've been involved with it in Minnesota for about 13 of the 14 years it's existed here. So we're pretty excited about it.
Question?
Lakeshore, we took the resorts on.
Repeat, please.
Feet of Lakeshore.
Oh, how many feet of lakeshore in order to have a resort?
No, do they each have?
Oh, each of you.
Yeah.
What do you have for lakeshore frontage?
How many feet of lakeshore?
You have?
Do we have?
Yeah.
It was 7,000 at one time.
It's more or less now.
He's counting his house in there. That's half of it.
Yeah.
What do you have, Ben?
The resort is around 2 miles, and then the Wilson Bay property, which is undeveloped, is just a little bit more than a mile.
Okay. And Kavanaugh?
We're about 1,200 feet, but of course we're at Sylvan Lake. They're on Gull Lake, so a little bit of a difference there.
Lucky you.
But we're the only commercial property on Sylvan Lake, so that's kind of a plus.
All right.
It's kind of a two-part question. Back in the earlier years, who was mostly was your clientele? Families from southern Minnesota or out of state? And the other part of that question is, for probably Matt and Craig, is who's the most famous person you've had at resort?
Okay. So 2 questions.
Hey, we've had famous people too.
Where did your clientele come from, particularly in the earlier days? Was it Minnesota? Was it outstate? Where'd your clientele come from, number one? And the second part of the question, who's the most famous person that you had in your resort? Stayed in your resort?
Okay,
Starting with you, Dutch.
all right. Well, if I understood the first question, the most famous person?
Yeah.
Harold Stassen. And
So where did they come from, most of your
where did he
clients?
come from? Well, this is when Harold was governor of the state of Minnesota,
Right.
and he won the election as the youngest governor in the United States. And we were in alternative years as a legislature. That is, they opened biannually, okay, every other year. And so the war broke out, and Harold was a student as they call them 90-day wonders. They hired and Army took over all the fraternities along University Avenue. And so Harold Stassen was approached by my father, who loved the fraternity and was a major part of his graduate life, called up Harold and said, how would you like to be a member of the largest fraternity in the world? And I guess even at that time, Harold Stassen had his eyes on the presidency. And so he said, sure. So my dad had purchased through the fraternity a house around the corner from their regular home. And it's right next to the stadium at the university. And Harold came over in his limousine, walked in the door, was taught all the pledge stuff, and had him do a few push-ups, I guess, and walked out with a fraternity pin. And he did grace the largest auditorium, the largest hotel, to give a banquet. And we had all the alumni we could flush out to listen to Harold Stassen. And he gave a pretty good speech, because if any of you followed his career, he had all kinds of new ideas. A different idea every time he ran for president. And so he spoke, and then for years thereafter, he was president of the University of Pennsylvania, and he was out getting votes for this in Oregon. And finally, it turned out he'd send a little telegram every year. Sorry that I can't make the alumni reunion. It turned out that some of the brothers in the fraternity were sending those telegrams, not Harold. Ha ha ha. You don't get it. Anyway, that's our distinguishing thing.
Most distinguished. I'm going to move on to them real quick here, because I got to get. So Ben, where do most of your clients come from today?
Today, Minneapolis is a big part of it, but I still think that this area caters to what I refer to beat the heat clientele. Beat the heat clientele would be coming up from, pretty big following out of California, pretty big following out of Chicago, pretty big following out of Missouri, Iowa. Those, a lot of major Midwest Southern populations. California, of course, is Midwest, but we do see a lot of people beating the heat to come to our perfect Minnesota weather.
Tom?
87% are from Minnesota for us.
From Minnesota.
Yeah. And famous people.
Yeah.
This was actually at a restaurant. He never really stayed, but he ate at a restaurant twice a week. Was General Vesey, who was head of the Joint Chiefs under Ronald Reagan.
Yeah,
and,
listen,
my favorite one or two would be Kevin McHale and Brian Urlacher on the resort that stayed at the resort. But
these young fellas don't remember what it's like before air conditioning. So
Actually, I
in Brainerd, it'd get up to about 85, 90, and say, whoa, boy, heat will drive the folks up from the Twin Cities and Iowa. I mean, it's like herding cattle up. And when all of a sudden air conditioning became universal, we lost big tribes of people from Kansas City and St. Louis. They used to come up to Island View all the time because of the heat.
Sure.
So air conditioning changed that dramatically.
I kind of like it personally, Dutch, so don't be. We got time for one more question, if you got one. None? Last closing remarks then. We'll start with you, Mr. Kavanaugh.
I had to start the whole thing off.
Yeah, that's why I'm starting to close it too. Yeah. There's a reason to this.
Well, this was neat. Thanks for having us. I actually enjoyed listening to these two. I love always hearing about the history of Mads and Craig. So, but I will say, and we've alluded to this, a large part of our success, my dad's success, came because of a great friendship with both Jim and Jack Madden and Dutch Cragen. I think he would have been the first to admit that us making it had a lot to do with the input that they shared with us. So, and that's part of the resort camaraderie, I think. We appreciate that. And, it's been fun sharing.
Ben, any parting thoughts?
No, it was great to sit here with both of you, and Dutch is an absolute vault of knowledge and has done a lot for hospitality in our area. I don't know of a more humble and giving individual than Dutch for our community. So thanks.
Well, thank you. I'm surprised there are this many people who even care about the resort business. Did somebody bring you here? It's a crazy business, and I think the most important part of survival is companionship. Everybody that you ask thinks that Mads and Cragens are bitter enemies, and they have no idea how many things we work on together, from signage to highways and roads, and one time we had the governor come up after a very serious storm that went through Pine Beach, ripped the roofs off of the rooms in the net, and by some reason, Kavanaughs have been praying, so they avoided it. But we had a serious damage too. And so we had the governor, it was Governor Dayton. And he felt he should come up.
I didn't put that as a famous person.
Well, okay.
All right, Dutch, that's enough politics now. We're not going to get into
But
politics.
anyway, here's the deal. Dayton felt he should come up and look at the damage. That's a part of a governor's job. They can't do a damn thing about it, but they look it over. And so here was Dayton and a couple television cameras and a helicopter. And they were just looking over. Mads and Cragens were just almost wiped out. We thought, do we want the governor to come in here and publicize how beaten up we are? Because they never come back when you fix it all up and tell people how nice things are fixed.
Maybe.
So we was telling the governor, you better not, it's dangerous to go down a road. And he's still determined to walk down there, and
We said to the Kavanaughs.
Yeah, the moral of the story is they came to our place.
and so,
Somehow we were cleaned up already.
and so we got a hold of the power company, and the managers of
We didn't have power yet.
What can we do to help? I said, have one of your 2x20s trucks, these monster things with 8-foot tires, have them drag out a live wire just as the governor is walking. And they came out sparks and everything was just, it was a beautiful display. And the governor felt that maybe he should go up the food shelf instead.
All right, that's enough politics again. With that, I'm gonna close this off before we do get in trouble. We do have some coffee. Maybe Mike, you could go check on that if you would do that for me. Same place we had and open that door. We have some coffee and cookies out there. As you first go out the door, there's a spot for you. If you haven't been on our email list so we can notify you of the history series, this is it for this year. We may be coming back next year to do some new things. We've got some pretty good ideas. So they're there. And then if you'd care to, there's some evaluations out there. I'd like you to fill out the evaluations. And if you care to put any comments about any of the particular presenters here, feel free to do so. All right. Thank you very much for coming. And again, there's coffee and stuff out there.